Hello, my name is Jason Odell. I'm one of the principals at OJM Group, and I appreciate you taking time to listen to our webinar. Today's webinar is going to focus on the potential use of selling your medical office building to a publicly traded REIT or to a private investor. What are some of the things you might want to consider prior to doing that? A number of disclaimers here at the beginning for you to take a look at. You want to make sure that anytime you're going to do anything related to finances, legal, tax, you want to make sure that you've got properly licensed companies and individuals. OJM Group offers a number of materials that will be free to all those that are listening to this webinar. We'll provide you information at the end of the webinar on how to access these materials. We've written over 11 books for physicians and physician practices over the years. We're happy to provide them to you free of charge. Real estate that physicians have ownership in, typically this has been a great asset class for a lot of our physicians on their personal balance sheets. This has been something that physicians have been very interested in historically. However, we've seen a significant amount of our physicians and the physician practices sell their office building to either private investors or to a publicly traded real estate investment trust company. The reason that they've done this is they've seen a decline in the reimbursements, and they may want to just capture some of the equity that's built up in this piece of property. They want to maybe deploy those dollars somewhere else, or they want to potentially capture some of that built-in gain that's been sitting there for a number of years. Maybe one of the primary owners of the building is retiring, and therefore this is a way for them to exit out without having the younger generation of physicians purchase the building, because economically they don't have the financing available to do that right now. So there's a lot of reasons we have seen that physicians have decided they want to at least explore whether or not it makes sense to sell their medical office building. What is a REIT? Well, a REIT is a real estate investment trust company that owns or finances an income-producing real estate. So these are large organizations, publicly traded companies that have amassed a significant amount of assets to go out and purchase medical office space throughout the United States. According to Revista, we've seen well over 50% of healthcare real estate transactions in 2014 and 15 be sold to publicly traded REITs. Therefore, what we've decided is to put together 5 tips for our physicians to consider prior to the sale of the sale of their medical practice to a REIT. Number 1, you got to plan ahead. Plan ahead means that if your medical office building, which should be owned in its own entity, its own LLC, and there should be a lease that's in place between the medical office building and the medical practice, you want to make sure that that lease is at least at market rate rents, and that you have a 5 to 7 year term remaining on the lease. And this is some just housekeeping things you need to do prior to potentially talking to a buyer. Why? Because this just gives and creates potential higher value for your medical office building when the REIT starts to dig in and look at the economics of your office building. It'll give you a better return on your investment for sure if you've got these simple things in place. Also, one of the things to consider is, do you take the entire transaction in cash, or do you pick up some stock in the REIT? If this has been a good asset class for you, owning real estate, and it's an asset class that you need to have in your portfolio or want to have in your portfolio, one of the great things about selling to a publicly traded REIT is you could actually take some of the sale proceeds in the form of stock, which would still give you exposure to that asset class, but in a very diversified manner over lots of different office buildings, medical office buildings throughout the United States. This is one thing that you ought to consider taking a look at as part of the transaction. The third thing is the tax considerations. With tax considerations, if the buyer is a listed publicly traded REIT, there are some tax advantages that they can provide to the physician seller that are not available otherwise. This is something to take into consideration and understand, and work with your CPA on understanding if you're considering selling to a REIT. The other big concern that you have is if you take the time to go down this path to see if it makes sense to sell your medical office building, you want to make sure that the buyer has credibility, financial strength, and the ability to close on the transaction. The last thing you want to do is get through this entire process only to find out that the purchaser can't close because they didn't secure financing or something hung them up. With these publicly traded REITs, you've got public financial statement information. You can see their experience in the closing of various acquisitions that they've done throughout the course of the year around the United States, as well as get references of other sellers to these publicly traded REITs. Very important, the financial data and credibility of the buyer, as well as it's very important that the purchaser has strength and financial ability long-term, because now you're having your medical practice is signing a long-term lease with this real estate investment trust company, and you want to make sure that if something goes wrong in the building or there needs to be improvements, there's capital there to invest in the improvements and the maintenance of the building. So again, selection of the buyer becomes very important because your medical practice will have a lease that will be in place for a long period of time. You want to make sure that your medical office building is going to be kept up to date. So that's very important. The sale of medical office buildings, as I mentioned, has become a very hot topic. Now seems to be a really good time to at least evaluate it and consider it. We've seen a number of our clients that have sold their medical office building for significantly higher values than the appraised values because interest rates are so low. These publicly traded REIT companies and private investment companies have been able to get access to capital at a very low rate to be able to make purchases of buildings even above market value purchases. Those are just some of the things you should consider. OJM Group has had a number of groups that have sold their office buildings over the last several years. We'd be happy to sit down or speak to you on the phone on a no obligation consultation to review your situation and provide you counseling and guidance related to the sale of a medical office building. Additionally, you can download one of the books, as I mentioned at the beginning, using the access code you'll see, as well as contacting us directly if you want to schedule a no obligation consultation. OJM works with physicians in a number of different areas, from asset protection to wealth management. Be happy again to have a discussion about how we might be able to be a resource to you personally or to your group, or a combination of both. We have a unique wealth management firm. We have over 1,000 positions in 48 states. We work in a multidisciplinary fashion, really in 3 different divisions. 1 is consulting and planning, 2 is wealth management, and 3 is insurance solutions for our clients. We do it both at the practice level and at the personal planning level. I appreciate you taking the time to listen. Thank you, and have a good day.